Hello everyone, welcome to Kalam's answer writing session. So today's question, I have introduced this question yesterday and I want to spend some time in order to set a background so that we will be able to evolve an introduction, body and conclusion format for this particular question. So this question is directly related to cyber security, as we can all say. This is related to cyber security, cyber attacks and how do we handle them. But what has been asked in this particular question, and I want you to notice that this is a single one-liner question. It is basically asking you two things. I definitely know the body of my answer. First, I have to discuss about the potential threats. This is what I have to discuss. The second thing I have to discuss is the security framework that is needed in order to handle this situation. These are the two things that I definitely have to discuss in relation to cyber security. Right, so these are the two things that I have to discuss in relation to it. I also have to start my answer with an introduction, end my answer with a conclusion. Now this cyber security is a really important topic, especially in the recent years, because we see several examples of cyber attacks. Especially in the last 2-3 years, there are so many examples of ransomware. There are examples of WannaCry, and this WannaCry in fact has affected a lot of countries. Nearly 100 to 120 countries have been affected by WannaCry. And there are several other ransomwares, malwares, botnets and so on, Bad Rabbit and so on. There are several funny names in relation to these cyber security incidents, but nothing is funny about the incident in itself. They totally jeopardize the infrastructure. Like for example, UK's health infrastructure was affected by this hacking or whatever cyber attack it was. And this health infrastructure was brought to its heel, literally brought to its heel. Everything was in a standstill in UK at that point of time. It is not a joke. And the second thing is in relation to Iran's nuclear program. Stuxnet has affected Iran's nuclear program, and think about something that could happen to anybody's nuclear program. This is going to pose a threat to the very internal security fabric of that particular country. Let's say something happens to our nuclear power plant. It might create a lot of problem for the people in the vicinity, at least in the short run, and in the long run, it is going to create a situation of poor security of the country itself. Nobody is going to perceive India as a strong nation if it gets repeatedly attacked, especially if its critical infrastructure gets attacked from time to time. Anyway, so cyber security has lots of forms. I just listed about a few ways of few attacks of cyber security. One was ransomware, malware. In addition to this, you have distributed denial of service attacks, and a modified form is denial of service attacks. And you have phishing, whaling, IP spoofing and so on. Like this, there are several other examples. These technical terms might not be important, but if you remember at least 2 or 3 of these technical terms like IP spoofing, whaling, phishing and so on, you can write them in your answer so that the examiner knows that you have good dense knowledge fabric in your mind. So now let's see how we can evolve the introduction, body and conclusion of this particular answer. So yes, we will discuss these 3 things. One is the introduction, next is the body, next is the conclusion for this particular question. So I already established that under the body I am going to talk about 2 things. First is the threats. The potential threats that are present in relation to cyber security, as in cyber attacks that are there, that could be possible. The second thing is to talk about framework, solution framework, right? These are the 2 things that I'm going to talk about. And how do I introduce my answer? One way to, of course, introduce my answer is to talk about cyber security in generic terms. You can talk about how cyber security sabotages either an individual, it could also sabotage a government, it could also sabotage the privacy data and so on. A lot of things it sabotages, of course. You could basically define the cyber security in just one line without taking up too much time, without taking up too much space. But one important thing is to talk about some fact. There are so many examples of cyber security attacks in recent times. You could link your introduction to any of these attacks in order to tell the examiner that this situation of cyber security is very grave. The question of cybersecurity is a very intense question. The gravitas it holds is very high. You have to establish this fact, and once you do this, you have to move forward, talk about the threats, be done with it, move forward, talk about the solution, and then you conclude. Right? So this is a typical format for your introduction, body, and conclusion. So this is what is sufficient. Without spending too much time on this particular slide, we will move forward and look at the sample answer. So this is the sample answer. I'll zoom this for proper visibility. So I hope it is visible now. Yes, it is visible. So cyber attacks are deliberate attempts to sabotage an individual or a group or even a government. And this is the first part of his introduction. And then India ranks among top 5 countries to be affected by cyber attacks, says a report by Semantic Corp. Now Semantic Corp is not a very strong and as in not a very well-known organization, so you probably would do well to write any report from a very well-known organization, right? If you could also talk about any report by World Economic Forum in relation to cyber security. You could talk about report by India's security organizations, probably our Intelligence Bureau, or probably our other organizations which have passed certain reports. Maybe NITI has passed certain comments on cybersecurity and how India is prone to the cyber attacks in a large manner going forward. So these things you could talk about. Moving forward, he is talking about the potential threats. So whenever you address an answer and you want to write a multi-pronged set of points in relation to that particular theme, you have to always think in different angles. One is the economic angle, the second is the geographical angle, if any, next is the political angle, next you have to think about it from the terms of fundamental rights, and so on. Like this, there are several other angles. Not all the angles are relevant, of course, in relation to each and every question. You are supposed to think about those angles which could generate decent points, which could generate good points which will impress the examiner. This is the motto that you need to have. So the first point is talking about economic threats, and these economic threats can happen in any form. These cyber attacks could be happening on our banking infrastructure, on our stock market, on identity thefts, and so on. And these are not small feats. When these happen, they are going to shake the infrastructure as such. If it is an identity theft of a very well-known individual, it is going to create a lot of problem. And if the stock market is affected by a cyber attack, it might lead to a collapse, right? In fact, a single attack on a well-performing stock market can greatly impact the financial strength of the country itself, right? So these kind of economic attacks are possible through cyber means. In addition to this, certain critical infrastructure could be affected. So what is critical infrastructure? Critical infrastructure is that which is required for the proper functioning of a country, for the proper functioning of a government. It includes banking, it includes security infrastructure, and so on. In fact, we have defined certain sectors of critical infrastructure. I want you to write them down because prelims mein these questions get asked. Prelims mein they have a question which says identify which of these are critical infrastructure under so and so government regulation. Not government regulation per se, critical infrastructure has been given by a body. Now what are these? Karke they can give you 4 or 5 options and you have to point which of them are right answers. This is a very valid question. So critical infrastructure could be attacked. Like for example, he has taken the example of Iran's nuclear program and how it was hit by Stuxnet. Next, critical medical history of the citizens could be sabotaged. It could be taken by these hackers or cyber security attacks, and this medical history could be made public, and this is going to hurt the interest of the person as such, interest of the citizens as such. Next is the infringement of privacy. Everybody wants privacy. Everybody thinks privacy is very important for them. Thinks kya hota hai? Privacy is very important. Living your life in the 4 walls is what gives you some amount of sanctity. After you finish your work in the office, after you finish your creativity or recreation time, maybe in the park and so on, everybody wants to go back home and sit within the 4 walls of his house, in the security provided by the 4 walls of his house, and happily sleep, right? And this privacy is really important, and privacy is not just about being in these four walls. Your information is also supposed to be protected. Your information should not be out in the public platform where people get to know so that this person lives in so and so street, that this person has so and so medical history, this person has been involved in so and so activity. All these things are an infringement of privacy, and these cannot happen. Privacy is very important, not just because of the reasons I gave, but also because of a particular judgment of the Supreme Court which has made it a fundamental right. What is the judgment? Justice Puttaswamy judgment. Next, intellectual property infringement and digital piracy. Next is information warfare and distortion of facts to distort opinions of the citizenry and cyber espionage. So some self-explanatory points you need not explain, because if you keep explaining each and every point, you will not be able to cover a lot of points. You will not be able to cover a lot of dimensions. So he has pointed out the potential threats of cyber attack. He has done a good job. Now let's move forward. So I'll zoom this for you all for this to be properly visible. Right. So this is visible now. And types of cyber attack. Now he is simply telling us that he knows certain key terms. He has certain knowledge in relation to types of cyber attack. He is talking about phishing, denial of services attack, and then ransomware, packet sniffing, network sniffing, IP spoofing, and so on. Now all these things you might not be able to recall in the examination, but jitna yaad aata hai utna likh lo. ठीक है, that is going to give you some additional advantage. Next is the security architecture. So we've talked about the problems, as in we have introduced our answer and talked about how cyber security is important and how India is going to be affected by cyber security attacks in times to come. And then we talked about certain threats of cyber security. Now moving forward, what is left for us is to talk about cyber security architecture that we have. One is the National Telecom Policy. Next is the CERT, or Computer Emergency Response Team. Now that is in relation to in general cyber attacks. If this is in relation to financial markets or financial sector, there is a separate CERT for it. I want you to write that down in the comment section. Next, the IT Act itself. This is a part of the framework or the architecture we have. This IT Act 2000 tries to protect privacy of the individuals, and whatever offenses are committed, these offenses are punished. Next, National Critical Infrastructure Protection Center. And then what else do you have? National Cyber Security Coordination Center, regular campaigns, awareness drives, and so on. So these are just points that he has written. He has written a good number of points. Now this is the kind of answer you should definitely have to write well, because this is a simple two-themed question. And there are two side headings that are there. That is fairly simple, no brainer. And once you evolve the side headings, under each of these side headings you are supposed to throw in 5 to 6 points which are directly related. And if you are not able to relate points, generate points. And if at all you are not able to generate points, immediately move to the next side heading instead of writing points which are not relevant. Don't fill pages for the sake of filling pages. Of course you have to fill pages, but whatever you fill, it has to be at least indirectly relevant, if not directly applicable. Next, data is the new oil of the upcoming century, and this data is what is targeted by the cyber security attacks. Not just data, of course, the internal security situation, nuclear grids, etc., इसमें data कहाँ से आता है, but in general, data is what is related to cyber security. The point of using a cyber security attack is to hack into someone's system, take their data, hack into someone's identity and take their data, and so on. So you could probably modify this conclusion to make sure that you cover other aspects and not just data. Anyway, so protecting it and our national security is of paramount importance. They have to go hand in hand. This is a decent conclusion. I don't think this is more than average. This is in fact less than average. You could talk about other things. You could talk about other dense points in relation to security architecture, and you could also talk about international measures that have been taken. European Union, what steps has it taken? USA, what steps has it taken? So these points could be clubbed. In addition to this, India is doing so and so things in order to improve the cyber security architecture of our country. That is the kind of conclusion which will give you more marks. Now this is the discussion for the day. We will look at the question for tomorrow. So tomorrow's question is in relation to terrorism. It says terrorism is a grave challenge to the national security. What solutions do you suggest to curb this growing menace? What are the major source of terrorist funding? Now this is again a fairly simple question because it is directly telling you, it is directly showing the subheadings. First you have to talk about the solutions. Second you have to talk about the sources of terrorist funding. And isme there is no rocket science. He has not twisted or turned the statements. He has not given lengthy statements in each of his sentences. Okay, this is a fairly understandable statement, and these are the kind of questions you should be able to decipher very easily, right? So this is the discussion for the today. We will meet again tomorrow.